The house where the Carter family lived was silent, broken only by the ticking of the old clock. Suddenly, the doorbell rings sharply, piercingly. The woman steps outside, not realizing who could be ringing the doorbell at this hour. She sees no one, but there is a mysterious box lying on the ground. Inside, she discovers a strange button locked under glass and a letter that reads, "Mr. Stewart will arrive at 5 o'clock this afternoon." The next day began with another problem. The principal of the school their son attends informs them that the tuition discount has been cancelled. This further exacerbated their family's already dire financial situation. Life was slipping into an endless struggle for existence, where every day was similar to the previous one, and any opportunity to escape from this cycle seemed elusive. Early in the day, Mr. Stewart entered the house. The man standing on the threshold made a strange impression. The woman retained her friendliness. He got straight to the point and made a proposal that changed the course of their lives forever. A button is a symbol of choice. One press and somewhere in the world someone's life would be cut short. In return, $1 million hidden in neatly folded bundles, which Stewart showed as undeniable proof of the reality of what was happening. To dispel any last doubts, he pulled out a bill and left it on the table. Across town, Carter opened the long-awaited envelope with bated breath. His eyes quickly ran over the lines, but instead of joy, disappointment was replaced by bewilderment. He had gotten a rejection. It was his only hope that could solve their financial problem. When he got home, Norma told him all about it, but the story seemed absurd, not making sense. The family discussed their situation endlessly, trying to find a way out of the cycle of poverty, but there was no solution, as always. Money was scarce, bills were mounting, and on Friday Norma, fists clenched, admitted that it was no longer worth hoping for the operation. As they discussed their problems, Norma's curiosity took over and she pressed on. The local police station received a call. Officers arrived on the scene and discovered a dead body. On the second floor, surrounded by shadows and unsolved mysteries, a young girl, scared to death, was shivering in the corner of her room. And Mr. Stewart was already standing on the threshold of Arthur and Norma's house. His hands leisurely took the key and the button, leaving in their place a suitcase containing $1 million. The money had become plentiful, but his fingers felt as if they were on fire as they touched the wads of bills. Not believing that they had gotten a man killed, they tried to return the money, but the rules didn't allow it. The only thing on their minds now was what if the next time one of them became a victim. That same night, the police had new leads. The killer apparently worked at NASA. The same place Arthur worked. Threads began to weave together, creating a picture in which every detail was part of something far more sinister. But life, knowing no pity, continued on its way. Despite everything that had happened, the family was scheduled to appear at the pre-wedding party. At the party, Arthur was given the opportunity to choose a gift. The waiter with a barely perceptible movement showed him the number 2. Arthur obeyed this silent sign, took the second box and, opening it, saw a picture of a man inside. Almost at the same instant one of the guests suddenly felt the blood begin to rush to his face. In a weak voice he called out to Norma and pointed to the telephone receiver. On the other end of the line was Stewart. He already knew that Arthur had gone to the police. The tension was building. The waiter said something that made Arthur furious. Norma asked her husband to get out of here as soon as possible. They got into the car, and he saw the sign on the window, "No way out." At home, Arthur, gripped by anxiety, went down to the basement, and in the common picture he notices Stewart. At the same moment, the phone rang in the silence. Picking up the receiver, she heard Stewart's voice announcing his presence in the yard. At the police station, Arthur wanted to know who that suspicious car belonged to. The police report that the car belongs to an influential person in the M management. The questions grew more and more and the answers slipped away, leaving only fear and conjecture. Arthur asks a policeman to take him to the scene of the crime. He wants to test one of his hunches. Meanwhile, at the bookstore, Norm is approached by a woman. She asks her not to trust anyone, not even her husband, after which she loses her consciousness. At the scene of the murder, Arthur notices 2 photographs. One is a picture of Stewart, the other is the cover of the very same textbook. Arthur immediately goes to the library, and Norma finds herself there as well. Immersed in fear, Norma tried to stay in the shadows, afraid to admit that she was here too. At that moment Arthur reached for the right book, and at the same moment there was a loud cracking sound. The people present froze, as if obeying an invisible force, and then they all turned toward him as one. There was nothing human in their gazes. Slowly, step by step, they began to move. The woman continued to stare at the screen in front of her, and suddenly a face appeared on the old film. Familiar and strange at the same time, it was the image of Stewart. Arthur found himself in a hall full of people. The atmosphere thickened, the air became dense. A woman appeared and gestured for him to follow her. She pointed to 3 exits and informed him that only one of them would lead to salvation. At the same moment, Norma stood in front of Stuart somewhere in the city. Arthur strode forward and headed for the second exit. In an instant the room changed and he found himself in his room with his wife. Meanwhile, in the top-secret research lab, scientists were having a lively discussion. According to the data from Mars, something inexplicable had happened. Stuart had been struck by lightning, died and then revived. No one could explain the phenomenon, so he was isolated and studied further. Something even more sinister soon emerged. Stuart hadn't just come back. He had changed. When asked what that meant, he only grinned. When asked about his trial, he said he was simply following orders from his employer. Their test came down to a simple decision: to push the button or not. If most people resist the temptation, the ordeal is over. But a new one begins. At the pre-wedding party, Arthur suddenly felt ill. Dizziness, tinnitus, trembling in his hands, something was clearly wrong. He decided to go outside to catch his breath, and there was a stranger waiting for him. The man spoke confidently, a warning in his voice. He made Arthur realize that not everything was lost, that there was still a chance to save the family. The key was to follow him. But while Arthur was still hesitating, strangers broke into the house and kidnapped his wife and son. Shortly afterward, already in the car, the stranger explained the situation. The entity controlling this ordeal is not omnipotent, so it can be killed. The man confessed that he himself had once already become a victim of this game. His daughter was stolen from him, and he killed his wife to save her. After all, she was the one who pushed the button. But at that moment a truck crashed into their car and they lost consciousness. The next day, Arthur sat with his wife in front of Stuart. He calmly explained to her the terms of the new decision. Their son Walter was alive, but his 2 sensory systems, sight and hearing, had been artificially disabled. Now the family had only 2 options. The first was to accept it and live off the money, but then their son would be permanently disabled. The second was to take a gun and kill the woman. Once her soul leaves her body, the boy will be able to hear and see again. The family realized there was no way out. And at the same moment, in another house, another family made a decision. The woman pressed a button. At the same moment, a gunshot rang out. Arthur had killed his wife. The police received a call. When the police arrived on the scene, Arthur was sitting next to his son and tried to somehow explain why things happened the way they did. Before he was taken away, the controller told him that his son would be taken care of. Their ordeal was over, but a new one began elsewhere. If you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe and give the channel a like. See you soon.